What's up, 49ers fans? Welcome to my very first live stream here. I'm Rob Shue, your host, joined today by a very special guest. Glad to have him on here. Jack Hammer of the Press Democrat, Santa Rosa paper, also writing for the Sports Illustrated All 49ers. Congratulations on the new position, Jack. And how are you doing today?
Thanks, Rob. No, I'm doing really good. It's great to be on here with you and kind of be the first one to be able to jump on and do a live stream with you. I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be fun.
Yes, it is. It is going to be fun. It's going to be unpredictable because this is the first time that I've gone live. And so you're going to see a different side of the personality, a little bit more flavor to this one.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Yes. All right. So getting into our topics today, obviously we have a big one to cover once we do get into the meat of it. But we're going to start out going a bit of a different direction. So obviously everyone's curious about what's going to happen with the quarterbacks. That's absolutely something that we're going to hit here today. But really, I wanted to put a bow first on your observations of preseason. And the reason I wanted to do that is similar to asking Grant questions like this is that you are our eyes and ears there at practice. And you're a fantastic observer. And everything that you can pass along to us is stuff that we otherwise wouldn't have a clue about. And so for me, it's about wrapping up the preseason. It's about making sure that we understand everything that went down before we move on to week one. So first and foremost, were there any big surprises for you in preseason? Were there any players that jumped off the board for you?
Yeah, well, Trent Sherfield definitely has to be talked about here as a surprise because he totally jumped off the board. I think everybody was surprised by what he was able to do. To come in, nobody was, and at least myself, I was expecting him just to be, make the team. If he's going to make the roster, he's going to be as a special teams guy.
Right.
And I really think that Sherfield made himself the third best receiver on the team with the way that he performed during training camp.
It's pretty crazy to me. I had him locked in from the get-go as a gunner, as you did, I think, as you're saying. And it was shocking to hear the positive reports. And at first I thought, a bit of a Corey Sheets situation where it's just, preseason, it's not going to carry through. But sure enough, it seems to have carried through. And someone that's out there doing streams and is on Twitter, Eric Crocker, is throwing out the idea of, drafting him late in fantasy drafts as a sleeper. And it does make me start to wonder, will he emerge as the third wide receiver option? Do you think he already has claimed that spot?
I think he is. I think I would rather see him be the third receiver over Mohamed Sanu just because he has explosiveness that the 49ers haven't had. At least he showed that in preseason. An explosiveness that the 49ers haven't had out of that third receiver position. I mean, Kendrick Bourne was a really solid number 3 receiver, but he wasn't somebody that you really were worried about, getting behind the defense and taking the top off the defense, where I think Sherfield has that ability. And that'd be nice to have out of your third guy.
And do you see the same ability to create space and make those tight catches that I feel KB was so good at and what we lost when the Patriots signed him?
I don't know. Bourne was really good with that, so I'm not sure if he's quite as good as far as the contested catches, but he's shown the ability to make tight catches. He's had a few of those throughout training camp. So I like what he brings to the table there. And as this season plays on, if Trey Lance gets into the game down the road, I think they're going to be able to take advantage of Sherfield getting deep. They did it a number of times in the preseason and during camp. So I think that would be something to watch for.
That would be refreshing to have that deep ball, to have those big plays in the offense. That would be spectacular. Mm-hmm. So what did you see about Sherfield that really separated him during the preseason sessions that were open to you?
Well, he was just consistent. I was like you. I wasn't really buying it the first couple of days, but it was just every day when you start seeing it on a regular basis over and over and over again, you're like, yeah, this is there's something here. This isn't just a flash. And he did it throughout camp. So that's why it stuck and why he's in the position that he is. He put himself there with his great performance.
Yeah, it sure seems that he has the work ethic that everyone wants in a wide receiver. That guy that comes to work with the lunch pail, that's there first thing. I just read something about Larry Fitzgerald saying he got to the facility at 3 a.m. and Sherfield was already there reading a book in the dark. Like, that's exactly what I want to hear about someone who's fighting for that special team spot, that's trying to earn his way into the third wide receiver role. It's the type of attitude that I feel exudes throughout the team and can really be contagious and bring in some maturity to a group of wide receivers that otherwise is fairly young. And some might say with KB last year, we're a bit immature in some ways.
Yeah, there's definitely a maturity there. There's definitely a strong work ethic. And you kind of, and this, Mohamed Sanu kind of brings that to the table as well. So both those two are kind of almost, they're your veteran presence in that room. And between those two, I think they're going to be a little bit better off from a preparation standpoint heading into 2021.
Nice. Glad to hear it. Well, it sure seems like we have gotten the nod that if it wasn't clear before, it's clear now that Jimmy G will be starting week 1 and seems to have the leg up to start as long as he performs well. Would you say, in your observation, granted that it's not saying much, would you say that this was, in fact, Jimmy G's best offseason program?
You know, I haven't seen him in the preseason before, so I can only base it off of what I saw this time. And he was, I think there was a lot of similarities between what happened with Garoppolo and Lance, and I think that Garoppolo's the incumbent. He has the support in the locker room, and I think at the end of it, when you have to make a decision, you go with, they're going in that direction because he has proven to be able to win, and the locker room is behind him. At least the main leaders of the locker room are behind him. So that, I think, gives him a little bit of a nod over Lance, just from that perspective. And then when you look at what's happened on the field, neither one of them have really performed all that great with the starting units on the field, but Garoppolo did perform better in the games than Lance did when given those opportunities.
He did. When he comes into those pressers, what's your sense of Jimmy? Do you get a sense of true confidence coming through, or is there a bit underneath the surface?
He's an interesting guy because, it's not like, I don't think I'm sure that things are bothering him, but he doesn't let that show when he talks to the media. He keeps things as, very even keel. So he's never too high he's never too low. It's the same guy all the time, smiling, happy, kind of almost a gosh darn it kind of an attitude. I'm just happy to be here and working through things. That's pretty much what he says on an everyday basis when you talk to him.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of frustrating on the field. You see that same even keel even after some of the interceptions that just feel like they came out of left field. You want to see a bit more of that emotion, but it does seem to be true to who he is, and that's what comes through in those interviews when he steps to the mic. Is a fairly reasonably confident person. I don't get the sense that he is bulletproof. I don't get the sense that he is Tom Brady, where he steps to the mic and he doesn't care what you ask him. He doesn't care what you say. He doesn't care what you think because he's just that sure of himself. I get a little sense from Jimmy that he says the right things. He acts the right way. He does the right things as a teammate, but that underneath it all, he still needs to prove to himself that he really belongs in that room, that he belongs in that position. And I think that I'd like to see from him a little bit of growth in that area. It sure seems like that's an area where he could take a step forward in my mind.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think he's very similar to Eli Manning, right? That was one of the things knocks on Eli Manning all those years was he didn't show emotion. Didn't matter whether they were doing good or bad. It was always the same look on his face, right? And that's almost really what you see with Garoppolo when he's on the field or in his interviews.
I love the way that Eli was able to make fun of himself for that. Like some of the Saturday Night Live shit that he did with his brother was just unreal. I mean, funny as all get out. And just that ability to poke fun. I think Jimmy, he's starting to understand that he can let himself come out a bit, but I think that he could do himself a favor by allowing that personality to come through a bit, being a little bit less robotic, a little bit less controlled, a little bit less concerned about what other people think of what he says. Because at this point, he's got to realize that it's all about his play. I mean, at this point, it's all on him whether he can continue to start or not, because the writing is on the wall as to what direction the 49ers are going to go at some point. It's just a question of when.
Yeah. No, if and I think if he goes out there and he performs to the best of his ability and he stays healthy, he's going to be he'll be the starter all year long if he plays to the best that he can. If he struggles and has some really bad weeks back to back, that's when you might see some things change. But that's the direction that I think they're looking towards now.
Yeah. Yeah. I made that prediction early in the preseason before seeing Trey, admittedly, that Jimmy would start. I believe I said 16 games. He'd miss one to injury. Having seen Trey play, I have to walk that back a little in that I think it's entirely possible Jimmy will struggle at some point and Trey will have shined to some degree, and it'll be near impossible not to put him on the field. But I agree with you in the fact that even now that I've seen Trey, I still think it's going to be the majority Jimmy for 2021. That just feels like the direction it's going. And that brings me to the other question that I have is were you surprised at all that he was named a team captain today?
No, I'm not surprised by that, especially considering I think the players are the ones that vote on that, and he seems to have a lot of people in the locker room on his side, so it's not really that much of a surprise to me. I think that even if you go back to I think 2012 when Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick had their back and forth, I think that
Right.
I think that Smith was a captain that season. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he was. So it's kind of a similar situation here, I think.
I believe he was. That was a painful transition as a fan for me to watch, the Alex to Cap. Again, I always root for whoever is starting at quarterback for the 49ers, but I am a bit of I appreciate loyalty. I appreciate friendships and things that matter like that. And it just feels that in this transition, I know it's a business, but certainly in that Alex scenario, it felt like a bit of a raw deal for him to get injured and lose it. Hopefully this year it will be less of an injury situation and more of a quality of play that dictates Trey starting. So what do you see Trey having to do? Is there anything that he could demonstrate that would make it crystal clear, you know what, week X, week 12, we're starting Trey? Is there anything that his play would dictate in that regard?
I don't think so. I think as long as Garoppolo is playing to the best of his ability, he's going to start.
Mm-hmm.
He's going. I don't think you start him because you're not going to go to Trey Lance unless you're guaranteed that you're figure he's going to start the rest of the year. You're not going to pull Garoppolo off the field and say we're going to run Trey out there this week, and then we'll go back to Jimmy next week. That's not the if things don't go well, that's not the way that this could work. It's got to be, at least I don't think so. I think it's got to be Garoppolo until you're ready to put Lance in there and keep him in there the rest of the way.
That makes sense. I tend to think that you're right there, that it's more on Garoppolo. Now, do you see it as a question of just winning, or does Jimmy need to be playing well? So if we put ourselves in a hypothetical situation where the 49ers are still winning, which seems entirely possible with the phenomenal defense and stellar run game, but Jimmy's playing poorly, do you see that as an opportunity to bring Lance in, or do you think that it has to be a couple of losses before we make the switch to the rookie?
If he's playing poorly, I think it's going to have to be an injury or multiple losses. Because that's kind of the deal. Going back to the Smith thing again, that's kind of what happened there, right? With Smith if Smith doesn't get knocked out of that game against the Rams and doesn't have to miss a game, he continues on as the starter, even though he struggled against the Giants a few weeks before that, right? And he'd struggled against the Giants in the championship game the year before, and so on. So I think it's going to take an injury or multiple weeks of him performing poorly for him to be replaced full time.
That seems fair. Do you feel like it really was a competition during camp?
I think there were times that it was a competition, or that the 49ers, I think Shanahan really wanted Lance to win the job.
Right.
They never really, he says there wasn't a competition, but heck, even the quarterback, even Garoppolo mentioned it, going out there and competing on a daily basis. And John Lynch was talking about how he'd closed the gap on Lance had closed the gap on Garoppolo, and so on and so forth. So I think there was a competition there. And I think what happened was the performance against Los Angeles was enough to say, okay, that's done. We're going to it's going to be Garoppolo for sure. And we need to work on how we're going to rotate these guys through to get Lance some opportunities.
Yeah, that makes sense. It definitely felt at times that they were attempting to create a competition, and there were various flashpoints within the preseason where it genuinely felt like there could be a competition. But in looking at it in its totality, it never really felt all that close. It never seemed as though Lance put it all together on a consistent basis to really challenge Jimmy for that position. And while fans may have been excited by the prospect of Trey coming in and starting, it didn't ever really seem realistic.
Correct. And I go back through all the games, and one of the things I think that's different in this situation, I keep going back to the Alex Smith one too, right? And Kaepernick, but they were actually giving Lance reps with the starters. They were trying to see who was the better of the quarterbacks by giving these guys reps with the starters. And you go back and, against Kansas City, you had a first down out of Garoppolo. They were moving the ball a little bit. They don't score any points, but then Lance comes in and he blows it with 2 throws, right? And it's a 3 and out for him. Against Los Angeles, he has a perfect opportunity to go in there after Garoppolo throws the interception, and he goes 3 and out and then throws an interception on his next series. So he just never capitalized and took advantage of the opportunities that were there just to take the job. He had the opportunities there. And I understand people getting excited about him, because I get excited about him too when I watch him play. But you got to realize that in the preseason games that you're watching, when he is excelling, it's when he's out there after the starting defenses are off the field, and he's out there against the backups, and he's playing with those guys, and all of a sudden things kind of start to get into a little bit more of a flow and a rhythm for him. So I think that's the thing, is he can make the plays. He can be a solid guy off the bench right now. He's just not ready to be the one on a regular basis, given the way that they're trying to run the offense. Unless Shanahan decides that he wants to go run heavy and kind of limit the amount of passing early on in the season until he gets up to speed.
Right. Which would definitely limit the offense and is exciting in its own right. The idea of what you can do within the run game once Lance is in there is very enthralling to me. And it does limit what you're able to do as far as leaning on Jimmy's strengths. I like how you point out that while it may have been limited opportunities and the door may have only cracked open a bit, it was open, and Lance could have kicked the door wide open had he capitalized on those moments that you just went through. If he had come in and lit the sky on fire in those moments when people had just had a chance to think, there's the Jimmy I know, or the Jimmy that frustrates me, that could have caused some ripples, but he didn't, to your point, and that's where we end up today. All right, So moving forward in topics here, talking about players that are super exciting from a wide open offense standpoint, let's move into a little bit of fantasy football here. I have gone through 5 of my 6 drafts so far. Yes, I'm in 6 leagues. It's ridiculous, I know. But I have my 6th league tonight, and I have sparingly leaned on my San Francisco 49ers for various positions. I'm oftentimes looking for value in these drafts, and so how the draft plays out dictates how many 49ers I end up with, more than just personal preference. I love all my 49ers. I wish I could have them all on my fantasy team and still win. That might not be the case. So when you go through a bunch of our skill positions, what do you see as those that jump out for potential lightning in a bottle type of seasons when we go through pass catchers to start? So primarily who you're focused on, unless we bring in sleepers, and maybe you feel that Sherfield could be a sleeper this year, but Brandon Aiyuk, Deebo Samuel, and George Kittle. Where do you rank those 3, and how do you see it playing out with rough number of receptions, focus during the offense, and touchdowns, most importantly?
Okay. Well, if you're in a touchdown league, it's probably that goes back to like a Sherfield, for example, right? Because it's red zone to the level of Kendrick Bourne, because Kendrick Bourne was the leading receiver for the 49ers when it comes to touchdowns, as far as from the receiver position over the last few years. He's been better. He was better in the red zone than Deebo Samuel, and Brandon Aiyuk was pretty good last year too. So
right.
Yeah. So from a touchdown perspective, I'd probably lean towards Debo Samuel though, just to kind of Debo Samuel, George Kittle. Those are your top two, I think.
Do you think, I mean, historically, George has suffered from few touchdowns, few and far between, right? I mean,
True.
for the level of production that he gets, he hasn't been utilized as much as I'd like to see from a fantasy perspective in the red zone. Do you think that that turns around a bit this year?
It could turn around a bit if you have Trey Lance in the game, because I think at that point you're
Mm,
getting a little bit more of the play action bootleg kind of stuff. Maybe you've seen him do like at North Dakota State the pop pass where they fake like he's running the end zone, and then he stops and throws it over the top to the linebackers,
right.
those kind of things. So maybe with him that you see a little bit more of that. Uh, and plus Lance was tight end heavy at North Dakota State to an extent, so that could help out Kittle there.
Yeah,
I'm
Lance being
I'm
in the
not
game, you
I'm not the
certainly.
greatest when it comes to fantasy stuff.
No, but you do have the inside info on the trends within the offense, and so taking that and extrapolating it over to fantasy, I think matches perfectly. When you look at Debo and Aiyuk, do you see them both as potential 1,000-yard receivers, or do you think that that's a stretch?
No, I don't think they're both going to be 1,000 yard receivers. If you're looking at one of those two, it's going to be Aiyuk as your 1,000 yard receiver guy, and then
Hmm.
Debo is your overall. He's going to get more yards for you because he's going to probably get 800, 900 yards receiving, but he's going to get you another 5 to 6 running in
That's
some
what
way.
I'm hoping for.
You
That's
know,
Debo jumps out to me as the best value of the three receivers. Kittle's going pretty early in these drafts, and because of the lack of touchdowns, I have stayed away from him this year. I've been burned in years past and have gone that direction. But
hmm
I think that Brandon Aiyuk is typically going before Debo in drafts, but because of the mix of receiving and rushing yards, I really think that Debo is the sleeper of this group. I think he has the potential, to your point, to have well over 1,000 yards combined from scrimmage and rack up a few touchdowns along the way.
Oh, definitely. I think if you're looking at who's going to be the number one receiver, that's going to be Brandon Ayuk. I think he has that type of capability, but when you add in both of them, that's where Samuel kind of takes over in terms of a fantasy perspective.
Hmm. Do you see this as a run heavy or pass heavy scheme this year? As we start out with Jimmy in there, and then that same question as we transition to Trey, if that happens at some point.
Well, I think you have to just kind of stick with who Shanahan is, and Shanahan's gonna, his even in 2019 when they were more run heavy, it wasn't like they were only 51-49, so it's not like they were extremely run heavy. It was, I think a lot of those runs were coming at the end of games as they were kind of running out the clock. That's kind of what put them over the edge. Before that, I think they're probably closer to 50-50 or maybe a little more pass oriented. So um, that's the only concern there when you talk about that is, do you want to go with Raheem Mostert as a fantasy player?
Right.
You know, and I'm not so sure there because I don't know if he's going to be getting you the touchdowns in the red zone like you'd want. He's going to get you the big hitters, but I don't know about inside the red zone. I think that might be more of a Trey Sermon kind of a spot.
Yeah, that's my only question around running backs is do you see any one running back really emerging as a not a bell cow because that's not the type of system that we run obviously in San Francisco, but do you see one of them emerging as the points leader nearing 1,000 yards, getting a significant number of touchdowns and receptions? Do you see that as one back or all four mixed in, five if you count Jeff Wilson?
I think it's going to be more. I think it's going to be a mix. I think it's going to be, if even I think Jeff Wilson Jr. was the leading running back in touchdowns for the 49ers last year,
Right.
correct? And so I think what you're going to see is Sermon's going to get those touches, and he's going to get the
Hmm.
touchdowns, and you're going to get a lot of yards out of Mostert.
My theory on running backs, and tell me what you think of this, is that Mostert's going to come out of the gate like gangbusters. I think that he's really going to light it up in Detroit, and I think that he is going to be leaned on pretty heavily to start the year, with Sermon picking up the pass protections as we go and then becoming more and more trusted within the offense. So I'm leaning toward Mostert early in the season, fading towards Sermon as we go down the stretch. Does that seem like a fair strategy?
Um, I would say I don't know because Trey Sermon was always he's been the number two back throughout camp. And so I think they're going to use him heavily. I think they're
Right out of the gate.
yeah, right out of the gate. I don't expect, because he's been the number 2 all along from
I
day
like
one.
it.
He's the only rookie that's been in that position, right? All the other rookies, all the other rookies were dealing with the second and third units. Sermon's always been playing with the starters all along. So I think you're going to see him getting a heavy amount of carries, and they might even be getting the same amount.
Wow. I mean, to me, that screams that both of those players are viable fantasy options where they're going in drafts. So I think both Mostert and Sermon, you have to have reasonable expectations. You have to realize that Mostert could have an amazing game followed by a complete goose egg, because that's just sort of the way in which the Shanahan offense works with running backs. But I think that the value is there for both of those. The other thing that I've been excited about is the 49ers defense in fantasy. I think that this defense has the potential to be best defense in the league. What say you, Jack?
Yeah, that's what I was going to tell you when you start talking fantasy. Would be if you're in a league that has defense, go get the 49ers, because I think this defense is going to be really good at turning the ball over. And depending on I don't know how the points go, but I know sometimes it's touchdowns by the defense give you extra points and all that kind of stuff. I think that this defense can do that for you.
I like it. All right. I've just noticed that I'm terrible with comments, so I'm going to go through a couple of these and get people in here, because I love the fact that people are chatting in the chat section. We had NM here. Sherfield can catch Lance's balls because he played with Kyler Murray, who has a top arm in the NFL. I say put Sherfield as wide receiver 2 until Debo and Aiyuk can catch up. Do you think that we'll have the same number of drop balls as we go into the season, or do you think that was a bit of an anomaly, Jack?
I think it was a bit of an anomaly. When you look at the ball that Debo didn't catch from Lance, that thing was over his back shoulder on a crossing route. That was a bad ball.
Yeah.
And then the one to Aiyuk, that was, I think, a little bit of a fluke when you watch that one. He has a defender from the kind of flashing across his face, flashing over to his side, that I think catches his eye, that takes his eyes off the ball. But the majority of those drops were coming by guys that aren't even on the roster anymore. Richie James Jr. dropped the ball almost on a daily basis.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, quite a bit. And Jalen Hurd, while he's on the roster, I don't expect to see him play anytime soon. So I don't think that's
situation with Hurd. Ugh.
Yeah. We can touch base on Hurd a little bit more down the road if you'd like, because I have some ideas on him.
Nice. I would definitely like to touch in on that. I think I think the Aiyuk play that you touched on, there's certainly a chance that there was a bit of a business decision that went into that when that defender flashed across his eyes. I mean, I don't blame him, right? It's preseason. I don't want him getting hurt, so I'm all in on that. I saw this one, and I got to say, my guess is, question being, can someone ask Kinlaw if squirrel tastes like chicken? Having just been in North Carolina and having been in charge of dinner one night and putting forth a low country boil was my dinner of choice, and we threw some sausage in there that was alligator sausage, and I thought everybody would be thrilled at this exciting new meat that we were about to try in this delicious dish, and people freaked out. Mainly the sisters in my my in-law family were not thrilled with the idea of consuming alligator. And then when mealtime arrived, everybody did try it because everybody's adventurous. And sure enough, tastes like chicken, tastes delicious. Pretty much everything that isn't beef tastes like chicken. So yeah, I'm going to say squirrel probably tastes like chicken too.
Yeah, that'd be a great question to ask him, though, in this next time he steps up to the mic.
It would, but it needs to be asked in a way that acknowledges that, like, it's not making fun of him. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like he's a shy guy, and when someone asked him about that before, he didn't really open up about it. I want to see the guy who eats squirrel come out and talk about eating squirrel vivaciously, right? I want to get that side of his personality, so we got to make sure he feels supported in it.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you. And it's funny because when that question did come up, that was actually the one time in that press conference that he smiled, because I think somebody actually asked him, a question about him instead of just about his football play. And he liked that.
Nice. I see this one. I don't even know. I'm just going to read it, but I see my name in there and other famous people. So I like that comparison right off the bat. And I think it's about me being bald. Homer, the philosopher, Joe Rogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, and Rob Shue all have bald heads. Take notes, people. Shave it or look like Red Foreman. This it's just the real deal. I have a beautiful head of hair. I just decided to shave it all and look bald because it's the way to be. It's the next big thing, just in case you didn't know. Robin Pratt confirms my dad told me frog's legs taste like chicken. I can vouch for that as well. I have eaten frog's legs. They do taste like chicken. You know what doesn't taste like chicken? Escargot. Doesn't taste like chicken.
I
Still
bet
good.
it doesn't.
No, sir. I'm loving this chat. People are in here. Amin the Dream. What's up, buddy? How you doing, my friend? Okay, let's get back into our meat and potatoes here.
Well, did you know that Amin doesn't think that Joe Montana is the greatest quarterback ever? Did you know that? He thinks that Tom Brady is. Do you realize that? That's the youth of the youth of our country not being able to know who the greatest quarterback of all time is.
Amin, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I mean, I get it. I get the argument at least, but Joe Cool, like you had to watch him play, I think. Maybe that was it. Maybe I'm old and I watched him play in person and that's the difference. But my God, I mean, I was devastated when he went to Kansas City and when the trade almost at the wire, Eddie D came in and said, no, you can stay. And I was like, oh, miracle shot. But no, broke my heart. And then he went on to have success in Kansas City and showed that he probably could have had success with us. But it brought us to the Steve Young era. And so as much as I hate the transition from one quarterback to the next, sometimes it gets you to the next Hall of Famer, which is hopefully what we have in this particular scenario.
There you go. That's a good transition.
All right. So I also like Fred Warner as an IDP, independent defensive player, which is very rare within fantasy football. But that leads me into the next topic. So while I have taken him in my fantasy drafts, what I want to know is much more in regards to some bets that are out there that I want to find out what you think about whether we should be betting on Defensive Player of the Year. Because as I look right now, Scoreboard Oregon, whatever our stupid website here is in this state that it forces you to gamble through the state lottery, has Fred Warner as plus 6,600. Now, I should not be gambling this level of money, and children, if you're listening, you shouldn't be gambling either. Be responsible. But let me just say that if you bet, the math works out with a plus 6,600. If you bet $1,500, which for a year-long bet is crazy, but not like crazy. It's just crazy. Not crazy. 1,500 pays out 100 grand, Jack, 100 grand. And I could use 100 grand. I'm a car guy. I could buy another car. It would be spectacular. I don't think my wife would let me buy another car, but I could try to buy another car.
Well, 100 grand, she might let you buy another car if
she might, because she would get herself a very nice purse as well. Probably several nice purses as well. So that could work out. There's room enough to get each person in the family a car with 100 grand, potentially. So the question is that a pie in the sky dream, or is this defensive line stout enough and impressive enough that they could force offenses into negative scenarios that funnel up into the backers and allow Fred Warner to just go off this year? What are your thoughts?
I don't think it's completely out of the question. I think there's a really good chance of him being able to be in that conversation and maybe able to win it because, like you said, you have that great pass rush up front. Mm-hmm. They should be able to shut down the run and force teams to throw. They're going to be in man coverage quite a bit, the way that it looks, which is going to put him in coverage, give him coverage opportunities to make those interceptions. They're going to be using him on the blitz. So those are all the things that go into Defensive Player of the Year, right? It's not just the guy it's not really the guy who is the best player. A lot of times it's who has the best numbers, who has the most highlight reel things that catch everybody's attention so they get the votes.
Yeah. Middle linebacker is one that doesn't often get the votes.
Right, because they're not getting the sacks, and the turnovers don't usually go to that position. They usually go to the DBs. But if he's in coverage and he's able to get some interceptions and pick up some sacks along the way, I think that goes a long way towards him being in that conversation and maybe being able to even take that award.
Oof, that would be big. Now, my only quandary with that is that I feel like in order to be set up in the way that we just described, where Fred Warner has the opportunity to really light it up and accrue those statistical categories that are needed in order to actually get the votes to win, My fear is that in getting there, that basically requires Nick Bosa to have the type of season that he had in 2019. That I feel like this defensive line isn't quite what we want it to be without that key cog. And then I start to wonder, well, if Bosa has that type of year, is he more likely to be the defensive player of the year than Fred Warner? So if you saw two statistical, phenomenal statistical years from both candidates, one from Bosa and one from Warner, do you feel that the edge would go to Bosa in the voting in that scenario?
Well, the only thing there is I don't think that you're going to see Bosa put up really big numbers that necessarily going to win him that award, right?
Okay.
He had 9 sacks the year that he won the Defensive Rookie of the Year.
Right.
So if he goes out, something I think somewhere in maybe 10 to 11 range is kind of what I think we might be able to say would be an expected number for him this year, which that's not going to get him the Defensive Player of the Year award. And I don't think that would take enough of enough off of what Warner is able to accomplish. Because
Okay.
I think what you're going to get is this pass rush is going to be so good that the sacks are going to get diluted across the board. So you're not going to have one guy registering 18 or 19. It's going to be a bunch of guys around 8, 9, 10, 11.
Yeah, because this front is just ridiculous all the way across, and they play as a unit in that way. I think that that's a good insight, that there'll be a bit more balance there with the numbers along the defensive line. And as these guys come in waves, it will allow a lot of the backups to accrue some of those sacks. Okay, I like that. So it sounds like you're on board at plus 6,600 with this completely irresponsible bet on Fred Warner as Defensive Player of the Year. Is there any validity to Bosa's going off at plus 1,600? So a $100 bet on him would net back 1,600 profit and your original $100. So basically I could make the bet of 1,500 for Fred, 100 for Nick. And then if either guy wins, I'm covered. Is it worth covering my bases with Bosa, or do you think that it's a very slim chance he comes out of this thing with Defensive Player of the Year, considering he could be eligible for Comeback Player of the Year if they wanted to vote him in that way?
The problem with that is I think that if you got into that situation, they're taking votes away from each other.
Yeah.
Right. So I think you have to pick one or the other. I think you're going one direction or the other. You're going either with Warner doing it or with Bosa doing it.
I think you just saved me $100, Jack, and won me $100,000. So, I mean, for sure, I'm flying you out to a game if that happens.
Well, either that, or you can just help me get a camera like the one that you have, where I actually look decent on.
We will get you set up with this bokeh in the background, everything that's going on in this, because you can do a lot with that, my friend. That would be fantastic. I love it. Okay, so that takes us through the Defensive Player of the Year. I got to say what's up to Ema Beats. Ema Beats sent me over some cool beats. I'm an old guy, so I got to have a little more classical with it. Ema, throw some more my way, though. I like listening to them. And it sounds like Amin is not done with his argument over Joe Montana. Unbelievable.
Yeah. That was a great one. If you didn't see that one, you need to go onto his channel and find that discussion, because
I saw someone clipped a little bit of it and put it on Twitter, and I saw that.
Yeah, I'm still a little bit hurt over it, as you can tell.
I mean, that's tough to come out of that argument feeling like you didn't really win that one, right? Because, I mean, it is a fact. Joe Cool should be up here, but it doesn't sound like Amin was swayed at all. And maybe that's not a reflection on the case that you made, but more on how resolute he is. Tom Brady is number one.
Yeah, I think that is. I think he's just he's like Kyle Shanahan. He's a little stubborn, so he doesn't see the full picture.
Kyle is stubborn, and I could see Amin taking after him in that way. Joe Montana is, yes, who we're referring to. Raruna brings another person into the conversation. Kirk Cousins is the best quarterback of all time. Shanahan literally said so. So there's another. Let's see. Bosa. Ooh, yeah. Rob with the full frame. That's right. I had to get the background in here, so I forced the full frame on Jack, because otherwise it cuts in, and without, I had to have my Niners gear. It's game week, so it is on. All right, we're at 40 minutes in, and we are jumping into our biggest topic here, the one that we've been waiting on. So let's jump right into the 2 quarterback rotation situation. I just like the alliteration of that. my question for you, Jack, after everything that you've seen and after the talent levels on both sides and after the confusion it's going to lead to for the defense, not to mention the defense having to prepare for it regardless of how it's rotated in, do you get the sense or do you suppose that it's going to be more predetermined based upon down and distance, based upon points in the game, or will Shanahan do this a bit more by feel? So the difference being the initial 10 plays of a game are typically scripted, something in that like, and then a play caller generally goes on to playing by feel. And yes, it's dictated by down and distance, but they also go with, well, I have a sense that this play is going to work now based on what the defense is giving me. What's your sense? Will it be more controlled and plotted out going into it, or will it be game flow dictated?
I think that it's going to be a little bit more plotted out in the way that it's going to be. They're going to have packages, obviously, and it's going to be maybe like in the red zone situations, or maybe in, second and short kind of a situation. Those kind of things, where they can bring them in, and it gives you the option to where they're keeping the defense off base a little bit. That's why I say the second and short, because that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have to run it. They can throw it and run. I think it's going to be a little more dictated than just a flow of the game type of situation.
I tend to think that as well. It's sort of it being a blend of both in the way that you described it, meaning that there are certain game circumstances that will dictate that we put Trey Lance in, and the flow of the game will then dictate how many times we hit those particular game circumstances, right? We may only hit the red zone twice in a game, and the rest could be long touchdowns all day long because, Jimmy throws a nice deep ball, so it could be a lot of deep touchdowns. But it could also be that Shanahan has his eye on those second and short, right? When you put Lance into the game in a short yardage situation, what an impossible task for the defense. The idea of trying to cover all 11 men on the field when you only have a short distance to go in the red zone. I mean, it must be terrifying for teams to have to go up against that, especially when you have two viable quarterbacks and therefore can risk the second quarterback just a little bit more, especially in high pressure situations where the win is on the line, right? You can be a little more careless with Lance because of the fact that he's not going to be starting next week. It's on Jimmy. Mm-hmm. I do think that Kyle, what he showed in the preseason could come up. I think you're right that most likely it's going to be dictated by down and distance, situational football, but he is a gifted play caller and does seem to get into the flow of the game. Now, he's not immune to the random brain fart that has happened to him in some notable high pressure situations. But I challenge anyone who's listening, if you haven't been in a high pressure situation, you might just ease up on the criticism a little bit, because I think people underestimate the type of pressure that's going on. I play poker randomly on the side, and I don't play for big money. But if you get into a pot where there's a lot of money in the middle, your body just acts differently. Your heartbeat is going through the roof. Like, it's just a different level of pressure. So all that to say, I think that he is the type of guy that has a good feel for that. I think that he could get into the groove and start to flex Jimmy and Trey in and out a bit like we saw in the preseason. But I think that's got to be in a game where we're pretty much in control.
Yeah, I can see him doing what you're saying, because it's a pretty seamless transition between the two. Really, the offense itself doesn't change dramatically in either direction. It's all the same. They're running all the same stuff, regardless of who the quarterback is. The only difference is when they run, for example, that outside, the run that they did against a couple times against the Raiders, where, Mostert runs out to the right and beats basically everything about that play is blocked up for the quarterback to keep the ball. Right. And it leaves just Mostert one-on-one with the linebacker. So that's a play that with they run regardless. But if you put Trey Lance in the game, all of a sudden now he keeps the ball and he can run it for 10 or 15 yards right up the gut, and it's a huge play. And there's no change for anybody on the field. The only difference is a little bit different cadence from the two. That is, and the sound.
That is the beauty of the Shanahan offense, being able to run multiple looks out of the same set, and to bring in a completely different weapon with a completely different skill set that allows them to flex in different ways with a various quarterback behind center, it certainly sets up for Shanahan feeling himself and really just going with the flow of the game. But only time will tell, right? What is your guesstimate of how many plays we'll see Lance this Sunday?
If he plays, I think we see him for less than 10. That's my guess.
Less than 10?
Yeah, that would be my guess.
Do you anticipate the vast majority of those coming in goal line and short yardage situations?
That's kind of what my thought would be, is more toward, like I said, it's either going to be in that red zone situation or second and short type of situations in the middle of the field, something along those lines. It's interesting when you talk about it because, after the Raiders game, when they were asking about it, Lance mentioned that it was personnel driven. And so maybe it is just where they just go with the flow, just depending on what the personnel is. That's when he goes into the game.
Personnel driven, meaning when a particular substitution package for the 49ers goes in, or driven by the personnel on the defensive side of the ball and how Shanahan reacts to that?
The 49ers offensive personnel grouping.
So that brought him in for various plays.
Yeah, and watching it, it looks like he's coming on the field with mostly 11 personnel. When they're taking out Kyle Juszczyk, and they're running 11 personnel, that's him coming into the game. At least that's how it was against the Raiders from my eye when I watched it.
That's interesting. Do you see any logical reason for that? Why you wouldn't see Juice playing a bit more with Trey? I would think that a power package like that could be a great goal line package.
It seemed like they were using, at least from little bits of, because they didn't do it a lot. So it looked like they had, on a couple of the times, it looked like there was a fullback in there, but it was actually at the tight end that was back there. It was Kittle that was back there with them. So they can get into multiple looks out of it, and they can really, part of the cool part about it is you can spread the defense out, and then that opens up a lot of running lanes and blocking lanes, because they can get out there with Kittle, move him around, and it's very similar to their 21 personnel anyway.
Yeah, it is wild how interchangeable a lot of the pieces on this offense are. And I suppose that has been intentional through the building that Kyle and Lynch have done on the roster. But the size and speed that they have at most of these skill positions on the offense really excite me for what this offense could look like and what direction it could go. To your point that out of the same formation, it could really be a power run type of offense, or it can be take the top off type of a throwing offense.
Yeah, that's what. Well, I like the fact that they can put, if they have Juszczyk and Kittle on the field at the same time, or let's say they throw out Ross Dwelly as well. So you have Ross Dwelly, George Kittle, Kyle Juszczyk. So you got a 22 personnel look. That brings the defense bringing in, maybe the run heavy, to match up. But
Right.
then you can go to line of scrimmage, and with a couple of motions, all of a sudden you're in 11 personnel because Kittle has the ability. Kittle and Dwelly both have the ability to line up as receivers, and so does Juszczyk. So where do you go? That's kind of the fun part about this offense.
Such a nightmare just looking at it from that perspective. That's crazy. All right, looking back at the comments before we flash along to our final topic here. We have a question around Aaron Banks. Did Aaron Banks practice today?
Yes, he did. He's back.
That's positive. What's your take on Banks? I will say that I initially was pumping the brakes on any type of panic. It just is absurd to me to really allow yourself to say, he's a bust at this early. But the way that preseason ended, I had to change my tune a little bit to where I think it's reasonable to have concern because of where you drafted him. Interior offensive line, you're looking for an immediate contributor when you take someone at that point in the second round. And at this point, and let me preface it by saying I like Brunskill as an average or above average right guard, above average in run blocking and maybe average to slightly below average in pass blocking if you see it the same. So it wasn't an easy task, but I think it's potentially time to keep your eye on it.
The tough thing with Banks is he definitely was struggling, right? He didn't look like he was a top guy right away. The problem though is he got hurt in that first preseason game. And so he missed,
Right.
he missed the rest of the preseason. And, if you go back, and Jalen Moore wasn't necessarily all that great week one of the preseason either, but he got better the further we went along. All these rookies have kind of been in that same boat, other than Sermon. All the other rookies have been in that, running with the twos, and then eventually you start to see them maybe running some with the ones, and they're looking better and improving. Diamador Lenore, Talanoa Hufanga, Jalen Moore, those guys all got more and more reps as the preseason went on, and so that's why we saw them improve. That didn't happen with Banks. So Banks is behind the 8 ball because he missed 3 weeks. He was already struggling to begin with. I'm not somebody who is pushing the panic button on this. I do understand the concern, but I don't say that I don't agree with anybody that says it's a whiff or a bust or any of those kind of things. Both of which I've heard at times today.
Yep. I have definitely heard at least the rumblings of that, and I agree that it seems far too early. The struggles that you did see, did you observe them to be more physical struggles or mental struggles? Acknowledging that he did switch sides of the line, which I'm sure is no easy task, especially in a transition from college to the NFL.
The issues that I was seeing were physical. It was not getting his hands into the right positions. It was, his steps being too big, little things like that. Those are the coaching points that I saw them working on with him, specifically stopping to watch him, because there was a couple of days where there was one day in particular where I was walking by and the coaches caught my attention, so I stopped and watched because they were really working really hard with him one-on-one during drills. And that was really what they were talking about, was just because with the scheme, we think about, steps and having big steps, but when you're an offensive lineman, those steps are really short, choppy steps. And so we're not talking about him taking a massive step like this. We're just talking, he basically just needs to pick his foot up and bring it right back down. And so to keep his balance and those kind of things. So those were the teaching points that I think he was missing on. And, he was struggling with guys with the speed of the game a little bit to his outside. It was just going to take him a little bit to adjust to catching that guy on his right shoulder instead of his left.
And those all sound like reasonable things for a rookie to be working on, and perhaps things that he would have improved on significantly had he those additional 3 weeks that the other rookies did. So hopefully he can make that progression. I'm sure that it's much harder now to make the progression. Now that we go into the year with Brunskill starting at right guard, it seems more difficult to overtake Brunskill without some type of an injury situation.
Well, it all depends. Brunskill, I think, at this point is the weakest link on the offensive line. At one point, I thought I would have said it was Laken Tomlinson, but now with Brunskill starting at right guard, I think it's more of Brunskill. So if he struggles quite a bit, that's where Banks is might be getting thrown into the fire. He's going to have to come back and play, and maybe throw him out there with the starters. And sometimes these guys play better when they're playing with the ones, just because they have better players around them and they have to step up. And there's just something about it when you have to do that. You tend to kind of raise your level of play to what you have around you.
And the offensive line is most definitely a full unit, that the play of one dictates the other. The entire unit of 5 work together cohesively in order to provide that protection. And so, to your point, being able to play with the individuals that are starting, that have greater confidence, that are more sure in what they're doing, and a center who is very confident in pointing out protections and schemes may help him out in that regard.
Oh, definitely. And I think on top of that, those guys are going to, having the starters out there with you, they're going to chew you out. They're going to, and just that in that chewing out process, you're going to get better. That's what I saw that with Jalen Moore after week 1. He was out there having to play because, if you remember, Trent Williams hurt his knee at the beginning of the following week. So he was out there all the time. He was struggling really bad, and Laken Tomlinson you could see that he was frustrated with them. Mm-hmm. But as practice went on, they took up, the way that 49ers run practice, they do 2 different team periods. They do a team period, then they take a break and come back. And in that group, his performance in the first session compared to the second was completely different. He was so much better in the second.
Yeah, it really is a shame that we didn't get to see that same type of progression from Banks, because as good as Moore may have looked for a rookie, I would have loved to have the freedom of Brunskill as our primary backup for the vast majority of the line. That would have been a luxury had we been able to accomplish it. Well, I have here a nice comment for us. Joe Montana has stepped into the chat and indicated he is, in fact, a huge fan of Jack and I. Joe, the feeling is mutual. You are my favorite quarterback of all time. Amin is absolutely crazy. You are the GOAT. There is no question about it. Joe Cool is at the top of the list.
Yeah, I mean, look, we got Joe Montana. Your first live stream here, Rob, and we got Joe Montana in the chat. I mean, I don't know if it gets any better than that.
Can I give you an honest story here that's not any type of a humble brag? It's just sort of a random fact. I came home from college one year with a couple of buddies. We were going to a NASCAR race that weekend, and we arrived at my parents' house. I wasn't living there at the time. It was just my folks' house. But we got there. We were staying there in Sonoma, about to go to the raceway to see NASCAR. And I hit play on the answering machine, and it just, I don't know why. I don't know if he's ever called before. I don't know if he's ever called since, but it was Joe Montana. There was an answering machine message from Joe Montana. And one of my buddies pointed out, and we replayed it, let's be honest, like 56 times. And we're just thrilled to replay it. But he said his name and then chuckled after he said it, almost as if he himself realizes what the name means. He's like, hey, it's Joe Montana. Yeah, that's right. Joe Montana. I mean, just unbelievable guy. The coolest. If he wasn't the GOAT, that experience made him my favorite of all time, but that was already the case. All right, Team Joe. Look at this. AJB is in. Team Joe welcoming with us. All right, this last section here before we pick the winner and close out on that is just about some must-watch players on the 49ers and what we should be watching when it comes time to Sunday. The way in which I got these players was I saw your call-in show last night, and I saw that Chardall came on and rapid fire hit you with a bunch of questions, as only Chardall can. And one of them was, who are you excited to hit? And you had 6 players. You had Bosa, Ford, Trey Sermon, Brandon Aiyuk, Kittle, and Deebo Samuel. And I'm lockstep with you on excited to watch these guys Sunday. Real quick, high level, what are you excited most about these players? What are you looking for from them? Let's start on the defensive line with Bosa and Ford.
Just with Bosa and Ford, it's just when those two were together, they didn't play a whole lot together during the preseason. I mean, they didn't play at all in the preseason, but even in training camp. But that little bit that you saw of those two, it was explosive. Nick Bosa looked like an animal the first day that he was back on the field. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do, and D Ford as well. Ford just has so much speed coming off the edge. Even now, with the back and everything like that, he looks like he's healthy and ready to go. So you got Nick Bosa and D Ford coming off the edges, and I wouldn't be surprised to even see Samson Ebicom out there with those two rushing the passer at times. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch this defense get after the quarterback.
Poor Jared Goff. That guy, just no luck. I mean, he's in for a rough day potentially on Sunday. It could get ugly.
Oh, it really could.
Yeah. Will they take the ball out of his hands for the most part to try and avoid that?
I don't know if they have the ability to, but they might want to look at it because he's been awful against the 49ers the last 4 games that he's played against them. He's like his quarterback rating's 70.4 in his last 4 starts against the 49ers. So I don't think that's going to change with the way that the 49ers are going to be able to come after him.
Okay, so the defense is going to get after Goff, and that's what we're looking for on the defensive line. You listed 4 of the offensive weapons. Of those 4, which are you most excited to see, and who do you predict has the bigger breakout day?
I really want to see Brandon Aiyuk have a breakout day. That's who I want to see because he's a guy who I think got held back a little bit last year because of the injuries at the quarterback position. He wasn't out there in week 1, and by the time he finally got out there, the quarterback was injured. So we only saw a little bit of him with Garoppolo, even when Garoppolo was healthy. So I want to see him go out there and have the kind of day that I would expect of him, which is, 100 plus yards, 6-7 catches, and a touchdown.
Ooh, I look forward to seeing that. Yes, without the offseason last year, he really got thrown into it. And so one would hope that he comes out and flashes and shows a lot of what we want to see from him this year. When it comes down to punt returns. Will he be returning punts?
That's what it says on the depth chart. It says Brandon Aiyuk as the punt returner, and it has Elijah Mitchell as the kickoff returner. So I think there's a very good chance.
Love it. Trey Sermon, is he the short yardage goal line back to start, or will Mostert and Sermon rotate drives?
I think that you'll see most. If it was a short yardage situation on the goal line, I think Trey Sermon would be in the game.
Okay, so
I don't see them rotating
fantasy
drives. It's going to be rotating based off of the personnel grouping and the situation on the field.
Situation, down and distance, and personnel.
Yeah.
Okay, that brings us to our final topic here, and it's an important one because it's who wins the damn game, which is all that really matters at the end of the day, right? So, what is your week 1 prediction for who wins between the San Francisco 49ers and the Detroit Lions to kick off the 2021 season, Jack?
I have the 49ers. I think the 49ers are going to win the game.
It's a shocker. It's a shocker.
If I was giving you a points prediction, I say 49ers 20, Lions 16.
Okay, so you're actually predicting it to fall within the point spread. You would not take the 49ers clean in the point spread betting.
No, it's going to be a weird game. I think the 49ers are the better team, but they've never seen Detroit. They don't have any real idea what Detroit brings to the table, and I think it's a situation where they're not going to really know that or be up to speed with them really. Probably till midway through the first half into the second half before they really know everything that's coming at them, because that's how Dennis Erickson won 49-7 or whatever was his first game, right? Nobody knew what was coming at him, and that was a terrible 49ers team. But they were still able to blow out the Bears in his debut. Weird stuff happens week 1.
Weird stuff does happen week 1. There is no doubt about that.
Yeah. So I'm saying 20. I just think it's 2016, and hopefully the 49ers all get out with their kneecaps in place.
That's a big one. I mean, this is going to be a test on turf. So fingers crossed. I tend to think that the offense or the defense will score a bit more. And so I'm going to put it at 31-13 49ers. I think it is a safe bet on taking the 49ers to win with the point spread. But I wouldn't fault you if you just wanted to stay away from week 1 altogether because of Jack's point that is totally relevant, that it's week 1 and you honestly just don't know. Jimmy historically hasn't looked great week 1. It's unpredictable. You don't know what the Lions' true strength is. They are clearly the underdogs and therefore have a certain fire that they want to prove everyone wrong for doubting them. So I do think that it's a little bit unpredictable. But the glorious thing, Jack, you know what the glorious thing is?
What's that?
We're going to have football Sunday.
That's right. We got football Sunday.
Have football.
That's right. And then going back to your deal, Kyle Shanahan averaged 14 points per game over the first 4 games as head coach of the 49ers. I don't know if you saw the tweet yesterday from Grant's buddy that he does the shows with every Monday, Vish.
Vish, yes, love Vish.
Over 13 seasons as a coordinator, head coach in the NFL, Kyle Shanahan's offenses have scored 19.3 points per game week 1. So just some things to think about when you start predicting 28 or 30 points for the 49ers this week.
That is definitely something to consider that I had not previously considered. I'm sticking with my 31-13 because I'm that big of a homer, Jack, and you got to let it come out sometimes. So,
well, you even have Tom. You have Joe Montana in the chat, and then now you have Tom Brady in the chat.
Tom Brady's in the chat. Hold the horses. Tom, terrific.
I don't know. This show is just off
Tom Brady. Look at this. 79,204 passing yards, 581 touchdowns. I need glasses, Jack, if I got to look in that close. 3-time MVP, 3-time All-Pro, 14-time Pro Bowler, 7 championships. I mean, he's running out of rings, for God's sake. Do I need to say more? Tom Brady has entered the chat.
Hopefully I catch up with you because you've had two of the best quarterbacks ever on your show, and it's the first one.
The stars love me, Jack. I may not have any subscribers. I may not have any viewers, but the big stars, the big names, they're all here. And it's just a matter of time before the masses catch up, realize this is the place to be.
I think Treynor had it right. I think I'm going to have to go shave my head so I can get in with the in crowd here.
Well, that's the end of our show. Jack's going to go shave his head. I'm going to go redo some research to find out whether I really should be placing these irresponsible bets that my wife probably won't hear about. I mean, it's not like I'm broadcasting it out on YouTube or anything like that. We'll keep that, down low. But yes, we will have football. We will be back. Jack, you have to come back. I love you on here. I just thoroughly enjoy talking with you. You are a level-headed dude. Jack Hammer of the Santa Rosa Press Democrat. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I love talking to you as well. I agree with you. Everything's fun when we get together, so definitely have to do this again.
Ain't that the truth? AJB says, great show. Big fan. We appreciate you, my friend, and we'll see you again soon.